Hi, and welcome to Argentina. This South American country is the eighth largest in the world in terms of land area, and its landscapes are going to be extremely diverse and surprising. In the north, you're going to find the Iguazu Falls. In the south, you're going to find Patagonia with glaciers and mountains. In the west, you'll find the Andes mountain range. And in the east, you'll find the endless plains of the Pampa. So, Argentina will be a country full of contrasts that are not only natural, but also historical, cultural, and economic. As I usually do in my introductory episodes for each country, I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know to visit this country. And to start, I wanted to give you some fun facts about Argentina. The first one is that the word Argentina comes from the Latin word argentum, which means silver. And this was due to the belief that the first Spanish explorers thought they would find abundant silver reserves in this territory. And this word silver, which in Spanish is plata, you're also going to find it in other parts of the country. The second fun fact is that Argentina is home to the Aconcagua, which is the highest peak in America, but also it's the place for Laguna del Carbon, which is the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere. So, as you can see, it is a country that will have many different things and many contrasts. I'm going to start now talking about the country's economy because Argentina's economy is probably one that appears in every recent economics textbook. For years, this country has been marked by recurrent economic crisis, hyperinflation, and devaluation of their currency. However, since 2023, radical economic reforms have been implemented and there have changed a lot of the country's scores. Their current GDP should be around $640 billion, and this translates to a GDP per capita of around $14,000. This means that on average, a person in Argentina is going to earn or spend around 14,000 US dollars, which, even though it may sound like little, it's actually above the average of Latin American countries, and it's even higher than countries like Mexico or Brazil, which may sound a little bit counterintuitive because of what I just told you. This country is filled with economic crisis, but remember, this first is like a standardized measure, but it demonstrates the importance that Argentina has in the Latin American economy. This country, despite being enormous in landmass, actually has a relatively small population of 46 million people, which is very similar to Colombia's population, for example. And well, although it is still too early to say that the economy is doing well, it has shown a tremendous recovery over the last years. This country basically went from having a 200% inflation in 2023 to an estimated 30% inflation this year. It is also estimated that by 2025, the GDP or the total economy will grow around 5.5%. And all of this are going to be signs that the country will improve its economy very soon. And well, most of this recovery has been due to the fact that Javier Milei, their president, has managed to have a fiscal surplus instead of debt, which is historic because Argentina has had a long and complicated history with debt. And just in the 21st century alone, for example, this country has defaulted 3 times, which means that the country was unable to pay its debts. The new government has implemented very strict measures to avoid future crises and to renegotiate with creditors, including the IMF, in order to seek to restore this international confidence around its economy. And this is going to also bring us to its currency, which is the peso argentino. And one of the key policies of the new government was to eliminate the strict exchange controls. And this has made an enormous difference because initially you had the official dollar, let's say, and the blue dollar. And this blue dollar basically was the one that was being sold in the informal market. But this difference now has almost disappeared. As of August 2025, for example, the exchange rate is much more unified. And while $1 before could cost 350 pesos, but according to the blue dollar, more than 1,000, now it's going to be equal around 1,500 pesos in a way much freer market. This, on the one hand, was very good, because it brought an alignment and a liberalization of the economy, but on the other hand, it was bad for locals because it was a strong blow into their purchasing power. Recent policies have also been reducing a lot of subsidies that the government was giving, which has, of course, had strong social impact. But when I was traveling, I was asking all of the locals how they were living through this economic change. And of course, they were telling me that this transition hasn't been easy and it's definitely historic, but most of them were supporting it because they knew that in the future this would have a positive impact on the economy. So, if you're from Argentina or you're living in Argentina and you're seeing all of this economic changes, you can tell us in the comments how it has been for you. Because, of course, everything that I heard was just as a tourist, but I haven't been living it. So, some things on my information may not be as updated as the current situation is. But, well, to understand the economy in greater depth, I'm going to now tell you a little about history and politics because you're going to see that all of these elements are going to be closely linked and basically also help explain a little bit why Argentina reached all of this economic crisis that it has been experiencing. If I go back to the very beginning, Argentina declared its independence from Spain in 1816. And during the 19th century, it experienced constant struggles between unitarios and federales. Then, with the arrival of European immigrants, especially with Italians and Spaniards, the economy began to prosper. And by early 20th century, Argentina was actually one of the richest countries in the entire world. Around those years, Buenos Aires began to transform itself into the Paris, let's say, of Latin America, and all of the economists and investors were believing that this could be the region of greatest growth. But some political and economic crises began to arrive, and one of the most impactful moments was the arrival of Juan Domingo Perón in 1946. Perón implemented a model that was based on social justice, industrialization, and the strengthening of the state, supported by enormous popular movement known as Peronism. His wife, Eva Perón, became also a global icon for her fight for social and women's rights. But Peronism, in fact, remains as one of the most influential political forces in this country to this day, and it's also still going to be a thing of debate. So you're going to find a lot of people that love this movement, Peronism, or some people that really hate this movement. So whenever you bring up some of these political figures, such as Eva Perón, this is going to always generate debate in Argentinians, but I'm going to be touching on this a little bit more when I talk in my episodes of Buenos Aires, because this is where many of the things happened. A few years later, if we go back to my history, in 1976, Argentina entered a military dictatorship that lasted until 1983. During those years, human rights violations were omitted, with thousands of disappeared, censorship, and repression. Then, they returned to democracy in 1983 with Raúl Alfonsín, which was the first democratically elected president after the dictatorship. And since then, Argentina has alternated governments of different political currents, including the Kirchner current. Javier Milei is the current president, and he's a libertarian economist who broke with this bipartisanship that was dominating the politics for decades. And his arrival marked the end of political era figures like Cristina Fernández de Kirchner and Mauricio Macri. And well, after this very brief history, I'm going to move on into my favorite part, and it's talking about the culture of this country. And I'm going to mention 5 things that I think, even though some of them are stereotypes, are things that consolidate many elements that I love from the Argentinian culture. And they're going to be soccer, asados, tangos, mate, and literature. So, I have to start with soccer. Because in Argentina, this is not going to be only a sport. It's almost going to be like our religion, but it has 2 gods, Lionel Messi and Diego Maradona. Clearly, the emotion with which soccer is lived in Argentina is going to be special, one of a kind, and of course, the world champion national team is an enormous symbol that awakens this national pride. Local teams are also going to generate a lot of emotions with classic matches such as Boca Juniors versus River Plate that will paralyze an entire city. But I'm going to tell you again a little bit more about this when we get to the Buenos Aires episodes. The second thing that I would like to highlight are the asados, which is basically like barbecuing, but is how you call it in Argentina and in all of Latin America, to be honest. But this is not only food, it's like a social tradition. Lighting the fire, preparing the meat, and sharing it with friends and family is going to be something that really is shared among everyone in Argentina. You will find grills everywhere, and most likely, if you visit Argentina, they will invite you to an asado and they're going to serve you the best meat in the world. And even though this is something of their internal debate, because there's always this thing of which meat is better, either Argentinian or Brazilian. I haven't personally tried Brazilian meat, but I can assure you that Argentinian meat is the best one I've ever tried. So, of course, it's going to be something that they're always cooking with great pride. The third thing that I want to highlight is tango. And I'm going to be talking more about this again when I get to Buenos Aires, but tango is a mixture that will represent very well the city because it will include music, poetry, dance, and lyrics that are going to speak about nostalgia, lost loves, and life in the porteño neighborhoods. Today, tango is considered an intangible cultural heritage of humanity by UNESCO, and seeing tango shows is one of this must do's whenever you go to Argentina. The fourth element that I'm going to highlight is mate, which is probably one of the most representative custom things of daily life in Argentina and in Uruguay. But mate is not going to be a normal drink. It's more like a social ritual because, unlike coffee or tea, which you just prepare and drink very quickly, mate, you are meant to be enjoying it because it will be more than the drink. It's more of the social experience that it entails. Because mate is barely drunk alone, and it is mostly a drink for socializing, and this simple action reflects the hospitality, trust, and community that's built in Argentina. For Argentinians, mate is going to represent a symbol of meeting and kind of having a small pause in the middle of your routine. And well, finally, the fifth thing that I would highlight is their literature, because this country has produced some of the most influential writers in the Spanish speaking world. The first one that comes to mind is, of course, Jorge Luis Borges, which is considered one of the great masters of universal literature, with stories that will mix the fantastic, the philosophical, and the infinite. Another essential name is going to be Julio Cortázar, which is the author of Rayuela, and this novel broke narrative schemes and is a must read for everyone that wants to understand the Latin American boom because it has a lot of important literary elements over there. From Argentina, you're also going to find one of my favorite authors, which is called Ernesto Sabato, and his magnificent book, El Túnel, or The Tunnel, is one of my favorites. It's truly short, so if you have the opportunity to read it while you're traveling in Argentina or before you travel, I highly recommend it. And you're also going to find recent writers like Samantha Schweblin, who has brought contemporary Argentine literature into international stages. What's fascinating about all of these authors is that you will find a mixture of philosophy and a language that will invite you to look at things from a very different perspective. I hope right now you're convinced that you have to visit this country. So I'm going to end my podcast as I normally do, giving you all of the travel tips that you need for visiting. So the first one, how long should you visit Argentina? Well, Argentina, as I've been telling you, is a huge country with many things to see. So it depends, of course, on the region that you want to visit. If you're only thinking of visiting Buenos Aires, I think you should go around 5 days. But if you also want to go to Patagonia or to Iguazu Falls, then you'll need at least 2 to 3 weeks to do it. Besides, you will also find some very beautiful regions like Jujuy, Cordoba, and Mendoza, which I haven't personally been to, but from the photos I've seen, they look incredible. So, I think to visit all of the highlights in the entire country, you would actually need around a month. And since most people don't have that much time, I'll just suggest that you prioritize. In my future episodes, I'm going to mention everything around Patagonia, Buenos Aires, and Iguazu so you can consider all of this for planning your trip. When I visited Argentina, I went for 19 days and I dedicated around 2 days to Iguazu, 5 days to Buenos Aires, and 12 days to Patagonia. So I'm going to take you through all of these places in my future episodes. The second tip is, when is the best time to visit Argentina? Well, again, depends on where you want to go. Autumn and spring, which will mean April, May, October, and November, are going to be perfect for Buenos Aires and the wine region because climate is going to be way more temperate and there are going to be fewer tourists. If you want to ski in Bariloche or Ushuaia, winter is going to be better, which means you should visit in June or in August. But if you want to trek in Patagonia, December or March are going to be best. So, what to choose? Because I just gave you many options. It depends on your plan. As I told you, I did the long tour and I did everything at the beginning of the summer in December, and it seemed like the perfect time for everything. Even though Buenos Aires was a little bit hotter than I would have liked, it was still okay. So I think this month, December and March, are going to be the best weather for everything except skiing, of course. But I found that this was a great time to travel. Third tip is, how expensive is it to travel to Argentina? And here it's going to be very particular because if you listen to all of the economic crisis that I just told you at the beginning, you might think that Argentina will be very cheap. And this is going to be false. It's not the case. And it's precisely due to the high inflation and the recent stabilization of the currency that, in my opinion, Argentina is expensive. It's quite expensive for being Latin America specifically. Like, if you compare it to Colombia, it's going to be way more expensive. Probably it will be similar compared to US or some parts in Europe. So food, for example, when I went at a restaurant could cost me around 20 to 25 US dollars a plate per person, which I think it's very expensive if you're thinking about it in Latin America terms. Especially if you go to Patagonia, it's going to be way more expensive because this region is a little bit of premium and they have been using dollars for a while already because this crazy economics led them to use the dollar for most of the tours and things. So, of course, it will be probably cheaper than going to Paris, but it's not going to be the cheapest place that you're going to visit. So, don't be surprised when you're looking at the prices. The fourth one is, how should you pay in Argentina? Because there was this debate on like, how can I pay with credit card, with cash, stuff like that. Well, the first time I went, this was a mess because cards weren't accepted everywhere. You would get a very high charge if you were paying with card, but now you can use a credit card for almost everything and you'll be fine. In more remote areas like Patagonia, I always advise carrying some cash just because it might make it cheaper for you and you should carry a little bit of dollars, a little bit of pesos just to have a mix depending on whichever the place or the tour will prefer. But overall, this has become way easier over the last few years. And my final tip is that Argentina is going to be a huge country, so the journeys between destinations are usually going to be long. To get around, you'll find that frequent domestic flights are going to be one of the best ways, or there are also bus companies that will connect the entire country. Long distance buses are going to be very popular and are usually very comfortable and safe because they have like bed like seats. But the national airline Aerolíneas Argentinas has a peculiarity, and is that their checked baggage allowance is going to be only 15 kilograms, which is very little compared to the normal 23 kilograms of most airlines. So I traveled all of the time with hand luggage or like carry-on luggage because it was little, and if they asked me to put it in like checked baggage, it would fit. But if you're traveling with checked baggage and you carry more than 15 kilograms, they will, of course, charge you for the additional weight. So, top advice is pack lighter because you're going to have limited space even when you're paying for checked baggage. And so, with that, I'm going to close this episode. And I hope after listening to this, you already know everything that you need to know for visiting Argentina. Tell me in the comments what places you want to visit or if you have any other travel tips for visiting Argentina. Also, share this episode with someone who loves to travel. And give me a review because this will motivate me to keep sharing all of my travel tips with you. Stay tuned and I'll see you next week where I'm going to take you to explore the end of the world. Enjoy your trip.